Who's asleep amidst the trees? Bats all a-swaying in the breeze. But one soul lies anxious, wide awake, fearing all manner of goose, hags, and wraiths.
Nice tune. Been a while since I heard it last.
Folk have forgotten it.
Got other things on their mind.
Things like me.
They paid me for you.
In times past, no amount of coin would convince a witcher to take this contract.
Times have changed.
For the witcher, brave and bold, paid in coin of gold. He'll chop and slice you, cut and dice you, eat you up whole. Eat you whole.
I decided to make today's video on vampires. So, in today's video I'm basically going to go over each individual creature within the blanket term of vampires, and what they all do in a way. But anyway, today we're going to talk about vampires. So, the term vampire is basically a blanket term for a bunch of creatures that sort of go under the term of a blood-sucking monster. So, the reason they do this is because the victim's blood basically has life force that they want to have. You know, it's almost like, as you can see with Regis and Detlef. For example, if you have a bunch of blood and you just left it near Regis, you can see that he becomes more and more like an animal. And it's because it's almost like a primal instinct, just how with humans, you know, when we're really hungry, we would eat anything if we get to a certain point. Well, anything that's edible. So with vampires, it's like you put blood there, they start to get more and more thirsty for it until it's almost like they're starving. To begin with, there are actually two grades of vampires. There is the higher vampires and the lower vampires. So, the lower vampires consist of vampires like the Plumard, the Garcane, the Fleder, and the Ekimara. You meet these in The Witcher 3, you meet them throughout the Witcher games. They're just basically the lower vampires. They're more sort of like mindless beasts than actual sentient beings, I suppose you could say. You have the higher vampires, which are the creatures that can actually sort of formulate sentences and interact with characters in a more sort of human way, like you see with Regis and Detlef. So there are higher vampires, which is what Regis and Detlef are. There's the Alps, or Alpor, as they're called in The Last Wish. The Catacamps, the Mula, or the Mula in The Last Wish. Bruxes, and the Nosferatu, which is obviously a reference to Nosferatu out of the classic vampire story. So I want to talk about vampires in the novels. So in Sapkowski's works, it breaks with many of the popular stereotypes. So, for example, a popular stereotype of vampires is getting affected by holy water or crucifixes or garlic or wooden stakes being particularly effective. So those are just folklore within The Witcher. A lot of other sort of vampire things do this as well, but The Witcher also does that as well, where it treats it as if it's just a bit of a legend. Because obviously, there is no actual reason why holy water and crucifixes would work in the Witcher universe, as Christianity isn't a thing. So an example I can give you is Regis. And he was a vampire who accompanies Geralt for quite some time in the books, and you see him in The Witcher 3 again. At one time he was actually decapitated, staked through the heart, sprinkled with holy water, and finally buried. But that didn't actually prevent him from regenerating, which is quite slowly. So that's another thing, vampires in the Witcher books do actually regenerate. You can't kill higher vampires unless another higher vampire does it, which Regis explains in The Witcher 3, where he was killed but Detlef restored him, using his own blood. So notable vampires in the books is Regis and Verena. I'll go into them in a much later date for actual character videos. So now let's get onto facts and myths. These are basically a few myths and facts about vampires in the novels. So higher vampires don't actually need to drink blood, but it's more like alcohol. So they can actually become drunk from it, and they gain additional strength. So you see with Regis, as I explained earlier, it basically becomes an almost need for them. They're not adversely affected by silver like other monsters, but most vampires, which, except from the true higher vampires, can actually be wounded by it. Vampire bites don't turn the bitten creature into a vampire, so that's another thing that they don't turn. Vampires, even though higher ones can end up looking a little bit more like humans, it doesn't mean that, they can change humans. They're a different race entirely. The vampires aren't born undead or transformed, they are born as a vampire. Not all vampires in the Witch universe have to avoid the sun. Many have adapted and actually tolerate daylight pretty well. They can't actually be seen in mirrors or other reflective surfaces, so it does take that out of typical vampire mythology. In vampire mythology, there is a thing where vampires can't cross rushing waters or rivers, but in The Witcher, that is no obstacle for their movement. Holy water, crucifixes, and garlic don't affect them. Partial bodily damage, like a stake through the heart or being decapitated like Regis was, is mainly just an inconvenience to them. They do regenerate over time, but if you live forever, as vampires do, or at least higher vampires, it's not really that much of an issue. If you live forever, time becomes less important, I suppose. So some vampires can actually touch white hot metal, which is where metal is so hot it actually turns to a sort of white colour, with their bare hands, and they can't get injury, which is what Regis actually did. So a quote from the book, which is an entry, is about vampires, and it's in the Baptism of Fire. A vampire, or Upir, is a dead person brought to life by chaos. Having lost its first life, it enjoys its second life during the night hours. It leaves its grave by the light of the moon, and only under its light may it act. Assailing sleeping maidens or young swains who it wakes not, but whose blood it sucks. That kind of entry isn't exactly fully accurate. A vampire is not a dead person brought back to life, but it does suck blood, I suppose. So in The Witcher PC, there is actually 2 points in the game where it breaks Sapkowski's original idea for vampires. And this is just the original Witcher, it doesn't really happen in the other games. So, garlic repels vampires in The Witcher PC, and also a human has been turned into a vampire, and this is the human Blue Eyes, which is just a woman who gets changed to a vampire. So, in The Witcher 3, there is actually beasts that are vampires. I'm going to go talk to you about the beasts and the characters. I'm not going to go too in-depth with the characters as I said before, but I'll tell you about the beasts. So there's the Alpha Garcane, an Alp, a Bruxa, an Ekimara, a Fleder, Gale, Garcane, higher vampires, Katakan, Proto-Fleder, and a Sarasti. And in this thing I'm looking at, it does actually say that there's other ones, but they're just basically characters. And the characters that we know of in the books and The Witcher 3, etc. is Hubert, Detlef, Regis, Oriana, and the Unseen Elder. The Unseen Elder is actually a very, very interesting character, and I would like to go in that much more in a later video. Kind of how I went into the Man of Mirrors, I'd like to talk about the Unseen Elder a lot more. In the Blood and Wine expansion, of the named higher vampires, Geralt can encounter up to 4, which is Regis, Detlef, Oriana, and the Unseen Elder. Throughout the main storyline of Lekage R4, Regis and Geralt's exploration of Teisha Mutena reveals that vampires descend from 3 ancient tribes that arrived on the continent during the Conjunction of Spheres. So with vampires, in fact, only a single portal opened from their world, and this was in the caves underneath what later became Tucson. So vampires first arrived in the world in Tucson. So if you go into the ruins, the actual symbols of these tribes remain deep within them and serve as a reminder from their original realms. The main story also expands the capabilities of the higher vampire. They're unique and have skills that accompany them. They are impregnable to most methods of extermination, practically giving higher vampires some form of immortality, and a set of vampiric codes that applies to all vampires, no matter the classification. So it's like an unwritten rule, but vampires are forbidden from killing each other. It's just sort of a thing that they shouldn't do. Obviously it does end up happening in The Witcher 3, but oof. So if a vampire sees another wounded, as I said, they can actually revive them, but they're equally entitled to leave them. There's not like an entitlement to do it. It's just up to them, and Detlef did it for Regis. So the tribes are the Garasham, which I may be saying wrong, I'll put it on screen, the Amurun, and the Tidet. And the Garasham remained in the west, the Amurun ventured beyond the sea, the Tidet, they went east and beyond the Blue Mountains. So for the next part of this video, I'd like to go into more detail of higher vampires. This is basically the final part of my video that I just want to talk about them a little bit more. So unlike normal vampires, true higher vampires are actually incredibly rare, and oftentimes are mistaken with lesser vampires on some occasion. True higher vampires can look exactly like a human being, and can even evade detection from a witch's medallion. So with witches, their medallion hums, which it shows it much more in The Witcher 2, which is basically its way of detecting where monsters are, but vampires actually evade that entire sense because they're almost human. Higher vampires are actually incredibly intelligent and have multiple abilities, as we see in The Witcher 3, like, for example, they can teleport a very short distance, etc. Well, some of them at least. It's very difficult within the Witcher universe to classify a higher vampire. Like, for example, with, I don't know, a drowner, you can say exact things that fit basically every drowner, but higher vampires have got so many different unique abilities depending on each one. For example, the Unseen Elder is a higher vampire, and so is Regis, but they're clearly quite different people. So true higher vampires are impossible to kill in normal means. I've said before, you can't kill them unless by an actual higher vampire. There are probably other ways that you can kill them, but so far none have really been discovered. So as a combat tactics that higher vampires generally do is they favor striking when they're invisible, which you see in The Witcher 3 with the quest where, you know, Priscilla gets let's just say harmed and then you go throughout that entire quest and you finally find the killer's a higher vampire. It's a very good quest. So one of the best ways to kill a vampire is actually a Witcher method, which is to use vampire oil or drink the potion Black Blood, which basically means that if a vampire tries to drink your blood, it basically burns them from the inside, which is a method that you see Geralt use on A Night to Remember trailer, which actually kills the Bruxa, I think it's Oriana. Another weakness that higher vampires possess is the fact that they are very, very, very badly affected by fire. So for example, if you use Igni, it affects them pretty badly compared to any other sign or any other method. That's basically their vampire tactics, are just to fight incredibly quickly and invisible in a lot of cases. So that's all I want to say on vampires today. I'm going to do actual videos on the characters like Regis, Detlef, the Unseen Elder, Oriana, etc. at some point in the future, so be sure to subscribe for them. And I really hope you liked today's video, guys. I hope you learned something new that you didn't previously know about vampires, or you just enjoyed having the video on the background while you played The Witcher or something. But anyway, guys, I hope you had an awesome week, or have an awesome week, and I will see you all later. Be sure to like for this sort of content, as it lets me know that you like this type of thing, and I will see everybody later.